Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this conversation with the Mayor's Community Policy Trust. My name is Dr. Coral Evans. I'm a former mayor of the city of Flagstaff, Arizona. I'm absolutely delighted to have with me today Mayor Jen Miles from Kingman, Arizona. Hello, Mayor.
Hello, Dr. Evans. It's good to be here. I appreciate you inviting me to speak on the subject of statesmanship.
Well, I was absolutely delighted when you accepted my proposal to come on to this podcast. Mayor Miles, I've had the opportunity to work with you now for quite a few years. I want to say at least maybe 5 or 6, if not longer. And I've always admired your leadership and how you are with your community and the love that you have for Kingman, Arizona, as well as Greater Arizona and your leadership. And so we are here today to talk about statesmanship. And when I was going down the list of mayors of who I wanted to talk with on this show about this topic, you were among the top because I consider you to be a statesman here in Arizona. So thank you.
Thank you. I
Let's
appreciate that.
let's start off because a lot of people might not know you, and so can we just kind of talk a little bit about your background and how you got to be mayor? How you ended up in this role.
It was an unlikely set of events because I never really had a goal of being in politics until uh, I became aware of so many issues that I cared about, and especially in our local community. And at that point, I really recognized that I wanted a vote. I wanted to be able to have a vote on what happened. And I've been in Kingman now for almost 30 years. It it truly is a place that I selected to come because I love the environment. I love the area. I thought it looked like a national park, and I wanted to be here. And I saw the potential for this city. And with my background, it was an unlikely background to end up here with engineering and a business degree, but I wanted to be in a community like this and I wanted to help build community. So I was doing that for all the work that I've done, both at our Mojave Community College and at Mojave County. And it was as part of working in the county with the system that I started having a lot of initiatives with our manufacturing community and became very involved and engaged with them and recognized that we needed their voice of the manufacturers to have a vocal voice to try to get some important things done for our community. And so one of the industry leaders and I decided to form a um, organization and for manufacturing. And it turned out it's called CAMA. Uh, but that was the start of really working hard with some of our community partners on issues that are vital to our economic future. And that was at the interchanges. We needed the Rancho Santa Fe interchange, and it's been on the books for 50 years. And that we also needed Kingman Crossing, and that's been on the books about as long. And I just wanted to have a voice and a role in trying to bring those to fruition. And so that's how I started, and that was 10 years ago. And I remember a counselor had left, and so there was an opening for the council, and they took applications, and so I applied. I applied, and I was accepted to finish a term, knowing that I had to run the next time. And I did run, and I was voted in. I was elected, and that was quite a privilege. And then I moved through the steps: counselor, vice mayor, and then mayor. And as that, I've been really delighted that I've been able to work with people through bringing these things to fruition, the interchanges and downtown projects that are really important to our tourism. And so there was just a lot that drew me into it.
Mayor Miles, this is very interesting, and I wonder if we could just take a moment And if you could just talk a little bit about that, because you made the comment of you went through the steps, right? So you were appointed to fill an open seat, then you ran for a seat, and you were a member of council, and then you became a vice mayor, and then you ran for mayor, and you were successful at every turn. I know that this is something that when I I ran for council, and a lot of people are like, you should run for mayor. And I'm like, no, I want to know the job. I want to
That's
learn the
right.
job. I don't want to run for that seat not having any experience. Even the second time that I ran for office, it was the same thing. I did not feel I was ready or I knew enough until I was like, 6 or 7 years into it. Can you talk about what it means to actually be prepared, or why did you say, I went through the steps, right? Some people kind of like, I want to run for mayor, but then, there's more to it than that.
The city is it's a complex organization. It really is. And I thought, that with the background I had, that I understood really how things work. But I also knew that there probably are things that I didn't understand and didn't know about. And so I was really happy to go in at kind of at the counselor level. And when we're talking about statesmanship,
Mhm.
in order to achieve that level of skill and experience, and hopefully some wisdom, you've gone through steps. You've made progress through the system so that you understand the political system, and also, uh, from kind of the overview down to the nuts and bolts level. And to get that, it took, the city budget, as you know, is a complex budget. A lot of fund accounting, a lot of enterprise funds, capital projects, just things that it takes time to really understand how 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 this money is flowing through this organization, where it's coming from, what it's allocated to, and what the results are. And that, uh, even with my background in business consulting, it took time to really, really have a great feeling for that. And that can't be done overnight. It takes several years really to figure out. And since the council is responsible for approving the budget, it's critical to go through those years of learning how the city operates. It's not just the budget. It takes time to understand all the departments that the city encompasses, and their roles and their challenges. And for confidence, because in the end, you want the staff as well as the community, broader community, to have confidence in you, and to think that you're credible and that you understand. And I don't believe anybody walks in the door that hasn't had any political experience or municipal experience is ready to just assume the mayor position.
No, and it's great to hear you talk about that, because I do think that when you look at the qualities of a statesman, and again for the viewers that are just tuning in, we are defining statesman as a non-gendered word. Okay, and
Yes.
I think it's important to point that out. And I am talking to Mayor Miles, who I consider to be a statesman, in talking about who how do you how do you get that level, how do you get to that level, how do you gain the knowledge, how do you gain the relationships and the understanding, because part of it is understanding how the political engine works, understanding how the management of this works, but also talking about the relationships, and that's a skill unto its own as well. One of the questions I asked you ahead of time was to discuss an issue that you dealt with as a mayor that was highly divisive, and how did you manage to bring all the parties together? What that took, the concept of compromise, was that something that was of value? And at the end of the day, were you able to get everybody happy, some people happy, or how did that project move forward or not?
Well, I'll start by saying I'm not sure that there's any project or any initiative that we have enacted that everybody's happy. Now, maybe everybody on council is happy, because I find that it's it's possible to bring council to a common ground, but within the community, there are always people that are going to say, well, that's a waste of taxpayer money and that type of thing. But it's okay. It's okay. You just learn that's going to be part of it. In thinking about this, I really have to draw on my experience with the Rancho Santa Fe interchange, because that has such significant will have such significant impact on our expansion as a regional multimodal hub, transportation and logistics hub. And that's part of the vision for Kingman. And yet it was very complex getting that agreement, because in the end, it's a public-private partnership that involved the state, legislature, ADOT, the Manufacturing Association, the city, of course, and the developers. So right there, you've got a cadre of stakeholders that each have a point of view and each have things that they want to achieve. I mentioned earlier that we formed the Manufacturing Association, and part of CAMA at that in those early years was intended to be a voice that could be added to the city's voice and other stakeholders to support funding for that interchange, because it would take, right now, the only entrance into our industrial park, which we have the second largest outside of, well, we are the largest outside of Maricopa Industrial Park. The only access was off of Route 66. And we needed one that was designated directly from I-40, which will be I-11, into our park. And so we started having meetings, and there were those who really didn't want it to happen, because they truly felt they wanted the Kingman Crossing one, and that was it. They didn't want competition, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I saw them always as two very separate and two very needed interchanges, because one leads to a commercial and retail and area, and the other one really to our industrial park and industry. So it takes perseverance. I have to say, you have to have a very good ability to really understand your vision and be able to articulate it and take on the questions that are going to come invariably. And in the end, for this particular one, it took an election. When I became mayor, it was really an issue between me and another candidate, and it was based a lot on the vision for the city. Are we going to go this route and build our industry and build our industry, or are we going to keep it more contained? And that became a big issue. So how did I influence it? Well, first of all, I is not the substantive word here, because as you know, it takes teamwork. You have to have a solid team of people who share the vision. You have to know how, in the end, the pieces can fit together. We had a great developer that was working with the city to create a development agreement. And also we had legislator that was in our court. And so we had lots of meetings, lots of work sessions, and these were public. And we were talking about how the benefits, the costs, and we really getting down into the weeds of how this would work. And it really it took years. Yeah. That's the other thing about being in politics. Things don't happen fast as a rule. And you learn that. There's no quick fix to something that is very large and very impactful. But I guess that is in the end, the developer and the city, we came to a development agreement, and the state, and part of this, I left out part of the good part. Part of this was many of us putting on the dog and pony shows that you give them locally, but you have to go outside too. And in this case, it was to ADOT and to the Transportation Board. Presentation. Here's the vision. Here's how we'll impact not just our region, but the state of Arizona. And that's really important. You have to sell the benefits to everyone. And if that isn't possible, then it probably won't fly. And that we had a committed group to go to all of the different meetings. In fact, I went to one in Flagstaff and spoke to the Transportation Board there. You build momentum from the ground up, and you keep bringing on the partners. So I give a lot of kudos to the developer we worked with, because they were able to work with other private landowners in and around that region and made deals so that they could get the land that we needed to construct this. It was very complex, actually, but that's why it takes time. And so at the end of the day, we had ADOT agreeing, and the engineering is virtually complete except for a drainage project, which will be completed. And also the state had committed, the legislature had committed $20 million to the project, and the developer and the city have a cost sharing agreement. And it's a win-win. And that's the key for successful partnerships, is win-win. You just everybody has to feel like it's doable and that the benefit is shared. Otherwise, no go.
You know, it's really interesting too, Mayor, and I get really excited because part of my this grew out of this Mayor's Community Policy Trust, grew out of my dissertation work that I did for my PhD. And I had the opportunity to interview mayors about, what it means to be a statesman. What does it look like? What does community involvement and engagement mean? And you were not one of the mayors that I had the opportunity to interview then, but I'm interviewing you now. And what I hear is really reflective of what they said. You talked about, I is not the correct term here. You talked about partnerships and needing to get everybody at the table and having those hard conversations, getting into the weeds at the work sessions, and this concept of a win-win, right? That, it's a win-win. Definitely there are people who are not going to be happy, but the majority of individuals understand, they accept, and they think this is something that's beneficial. And so I think that really dives into really the next question that I had, which was, how do you define activism? How do you define statesmanship? And do you see a difference between the two?
Yes, I do see a difference. As I mentioned earlier, the statesman, and it's a pretty traditional definition, but has a very excellent understanding of the political arena or the process, based on experience and development of skills to implement, to create and implement visions. I think a statesman, though, is a person that has a wisdom to assess things based on I want to say the good of the order, the good of many, and that's very difficult sometimes because there are competing factions, and And those competing factions often are represented by activists who really are speakers for that particular issue. And so a good example right now, there's water is one of the key issues in our region. And I think I failed to mention that in an earlier conversation, Coral. We'll have another talk about that. But there are organizations that are very wedded to their particular use of water. Mm-hmm. And so they have people that are very strong in lobbying for them. And so it doesn't have to be a lobbyist. It can be any person that just feels strongly about a particular issue, and will do whatever it takes, if you will. Not whatever it takes. No. They will do a lot to advocate for that issue. A statesman needs to hear that voice, and needs to hear the voice of many, and try to synthesize where this is a fair and equitable resolution, because people can feel a lot better about things if they believe it came from a fair position, where they know the good of many is really considered. Mm-hmm. And to try to find that common ground, bracket it, find it. And as we know today, that's getting very difficult to do, because people are more entrenched in their positions, and many times unwilling to find that common ground unless it's their ground. So it's an interesting time in politics today.
Before we went live, we were having a conversation, and I mentioned to you, Mayor, that one of the reasons why I was so focused on mayors, we have had a previous congressman on the show, but the focus has been really exclusively mayors, because mayors have, in my mind, a unique viewpoint. Mayors are elected at the local level in nonpartisan races. I mentioned to you that potholes don't have parties, and you're like, that's exactly right. Water really doesn't have a party. Our residents expect to turn on the tap and expect to have clean water to come out of it. Mm-hmm. And we don't pick and choose whose taps are turned on, right? You deliver water to a system that is clean and healthy for people to drink. That's the only thing that you really are concerned about. And so I think it's pretty important, and I think it's very telling to hear you use the words fair and equitable, right? Fair and equitable. What is fair and equitable to the group, to the society that I represent? I started my career out as an activist, and I can remember that I was focused on that one thing, right? Focused on doing this. And that's because that was my role. And I was there to speak on that. And that was the issue at hand that was most pressing for the individuals that I was representing. But you have to balance that with that request with everything else, right? And I learned once I got on council about the everything else. It wasn't just about this one building that we were trying to save, right? It was also about the senior center, the police and fire, the open space, sustainability, water, utilities. It was about, taxes. It was about a whole bunch of other stuff that I was not focused on because I was focused on that one thing.
I think that is, I think that's characterizes the activists. And I think we need them. Mm-hmm. We need people who are focused on their thing. But if you are going to change the role and become on council or become, even or at higher levels of government, you still need to bear that in mind. And you're going to talk to people who are adamant about their position and about their agenda item. You've got to be able to talk to them and and talk to each person. And we've done that with water, for example. We've had 2 years of meetings as part of a legislative study committee down in Phoenix, where we had all the primary stakeholders at the table. And I am speaking to those of us that represented municipality. I did that, but also the county. And we also had the ranchers and farmers and people, organizations associated with that. So you had that dynamic mix of very contrary positions. And at the end of the day, we still were able to come out with 10 recommendations with a majority. It was not unanimous, but that's okay. We had enough support to get those recommendations through. And that's a real political process in itself. And it's a learning experience for everybody at the table. So, and granted, some never retracted an inch from their position, but others, because they saw something new or learned something new and considered something else, were able to forge enough of an understanding that was common so that we could put forth recommendations. So that's really a great process to go through.
So that's also important to understand that too, right? So you bring people together, and I think this is just for all of us to understand and really think about, whether we are coming as the leaders or whether we are coming as one of the invitees or whether we are coming as, the public who's speaking during public participation. The idea is that we're coming, and if we come with the ability to want to hear the other side, right? To want to hear something new, with the intent to consider, what it is that we're hearing, it is possible to get to a solution. It might not be the exact solution that you want, but it is possible. And again, that's why I think it's important to have these conversations with mayors, because mayors do this all day, every day. How many people live in Kingman, Arizona?
Well, our population within the city limits is about 32,000, 33. But contiguous areas like Golden Valley and Greater Kingman, called Butler, which is called Greater Kingman, probably 60 to 70,000. And they think they have a boat too.
So you have about 100,000 people moving in and out of your jurisdiction every day, right? Most of which think that they are part of this thing called Kingman, because they really are, because they're in and out, either going to school there, buying stuff there, they're working there, right?
Right.
And so you have all these different thoughts and competing interests that you got to gel together into a plan. So I'm going to skip one question. We'll go back to it because I think this ties into this conversation of what do you think about single issue candidates? Because we seem to have a lot of those types of things.
We sure do. I think it's a narrow focus, and I think the job is much bigger than they're allowing with just a single issue. And we have them here everywhere. They're kind of everywhere right now, where they're campaigning on a single issue, and it's hard. You cannot know really what they even think about anything else, and the anything else is very broad, and touches people's lives every day, and so it's more important to me for a candidate to sell themselves, one, based on who they are, on their experience, and then their position, if you will, on a number of issues, so that you get a better understanding of how they will govern. And I've also noticed that some people who are campaigning on one issue or a single issue have radical or extreme solutions. And again, once you get into the job, you find out that all these other forces are at play, and nothing Nothing is as straightforward and boom, normally, as I believe they think
Mhm.
what
And
they
I
would accomplish.
Right. And I know that when I first came in, I used to think, well, why can't we do this rapidly? Then I started looking at some of the rules that are in place, right? I want to be clear that I think that government should be effective and efficient with residents' times, right? Time is money, and I think that we should do our best to be efficient and effective with it. But there's a reason why some of these parameters are in place, right? And it's because we're dealing with the public's assets.
That's right.
This is not like my individual asset. This is not your individual asset. This is the public's asset. In your case, you have 32 to 100,000 people that are the public, right? In my case, I had 80,000 plus everybody else that was the
Yeah,
public. And so there's a reason why there are timelines, there's certain processes in place before you do certain things because you are dealing with the collective's asset. I do agree too with the issue of the single issue candidates. I know I had the opportunity to be on council with at least one, and I remember this individual at a council meeting going, I wasn't elected to deal with that. I was elected for this one issue. And I was like, yes, but that issue has now been solved. We are like, 3 months into your term, and we literally have another 3 years plus what, 9 months to go. And
yeah,
you are elected for a 4-year term. And so we have water, we have police and fire, we have, the roads tax, we have open space, personnel,
yeah.
like we have the airport, like we have a whole bunch of other things that you are supposed to be a part of.
That's right. And and that goes back full circle to what we said at the beginning, which is it's a complex organism, it takes time to understand all the facets of a city or of any large entity. But it's necessary in order to do what the people elected you to do. The other thing I have seen, are people coming on with an agenda, and that's okay. Uh, but then they have to learn that, wait a minute, oh, I'm supposed to think about this from the perspective
Yeah.
of all the people in this community, because you'll have them all coming to you and giving you their thoughts about it one way or the other, and and to get out of that mindset that my my people are over here and they're over there. No, we are in charge of decision making for the whole, and that's important. That's an important shift too, to
Yeah.
think for the whole of the group, the good for the group, and also what you were speaking to.
And I think it's dangerous because I think that sometimes people don't necessarily make that shift.
Yeah.
And I think that that does a disservice to the overall electric. I think that's how you say it. But the overall,
Electorate.
there you go, electorate. How do you say it again?
Electorate.
There we go.
Mm.
Because I think it does a disservice to the majority, right? The overall, everybody in your community. If you cannot make that transition from activists and focusing on one group of individuals to the group that you represent and serve, which is your entire community. And I think you said no, you said something that I think you said something earlier in the conversation about the importance of talking to people and
Oh
hearing
yes.
the different viewpoints and why that's important that you hear people that are not necessarily like-minded to what your viewpoint is.
It's always interesting, and at the end of the conversations, I think both people leave. I hope at least having garnered something new or an understanding that they didn't have before, and that that will come if you really have a conversation and a dialogue. But truly, to be in this political world, you have to have the support of the electorate, and that that requires that you talk to a lot of groups of all different natures of groups. And I liked that. I liked that I was talking with this party's group and this party's group and the American Legion or all these, or the Elks or whoever I was talking to, or so optimist, you learn a lot about what's going on, when you're connected with all the people who are just doing things in your community. Um, and that's important. That all feeds into your understanding of your city or of your region. And then you get a much better feel for how to operate in that.
Mayor Miles, you mentioned the concept of governance or people being willing to accept the decision if they feel that it came from a space that was fair and equitable. I want to go back to that because, one of the questions, the question that we skipped over, had to do with empathy and whether or not you think that the concept that empathy plays a role in the concept of statesmanship.
Yes, I do think that empathy, compassion, uh, a person who is a statesperson uh, has that capacity to imagine different walks of life and different people in different situations. They don't have to have lived that in order to understand and have empathy for the person, not sympathy, but empathy. And in doing that, you get a more broad emotional IQ, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to, I think, uh, better decision making. Because, as I say, my background with engineering and business is, it's not, you don't think about that as a empathetic type of occupation. But that's part of why I wanted to come to community and help build community, because I really love that aspect of work. But even so, I don't care what your background is, that empathy will help you uh, make a better decision, because you can understand without having to live it.
And when I was writing my dissertation and doing my research, the key difference between a politician, for lack of a better word, and a statesman that was identified was the concept of empathy. Right?
Really, yeah,
You could have phenomenal activists, and I'm glad to hear you say earlier, we need activists, right? And I tell people that my body of work is not about we don't need activists.
right,
We need activists. Activists are what really, in certain ways, are our moral compass that tell us this is a problem
yeah.
and we need to address this issue. So this is not about not needing activists, we need them. This is about that difference, that nuance between a politician. You can have really good politicians, right? People are very strategic in nature. They know exactly what to say. They're on point all day, every day. But there is a nuance between a politician and a statesman.
Oh,
And the
very big.
nuance, yeah, and the nuance that was discovered through the research was the concept of empathy and the understanding of the need for that.
It would it would really change the conversation at every level of government and at every political level if that were more represented in politicians today. Because I do think, uh, and you mentioned this, the moral compass, that that just will make or break um, how the country operates, how the city operates. Um, why do we care about the quality of life for our citizens? Because we care about their well-being, their physical well-being, their uh, their mental well-being, And so we dedicate resources to parks and trails and community centers and transit for those who can't afford to drive. And those all come from caring and empathy for people in various stages of life. And making our sidewalks ADA, yes, it's required, but it's the right thing. And that's always what you ask are you doing the right thing?
And we had to be moving now. The sun is coming in.
Yeah, the sun's coming in, and I'm like, okay, I've got to move the camera. But yeah, I do believe that. And I think that with empathy, it would diminish the need for name calling, for labeling. Labeling is very, prevalent today. And if we really communicated as one human being to another and resolve things. I'm a problem solver. That's how I see my contribution many times is looking for this. I look for solutions. But in doing that, and in politics especially, I learned you've got a whole lot of stakeholders to come together, and you're not going to get them all ever, but you have to bracket and find the common ground and then move forward. So much gets stalled because people get disheartened or resistant. And in I can't even tell you why Rancho Santa Fe took 50 years. I'm not kidding. To finally get a development agreement, but there's always roadblocks, and so you have to really, as I say, full circle. You have to be persistent, tenacious, dedicated, committed, a little bit crazy.
Just a little bit. A little bit of craziness always helps.
That does.
Well, Mayor, we are winding down our time here today for this policy trust discussion. I would like to say thank you so much for being on my policy trust. I was very sincere when I said that I look at you as one of the statesmen that we have here in Arizona. Just having seen you in action, understanding what you do there, in Kingman, not only Kingman, you were also on the Greater Arizona Mayors Association, or you're part of that group, as well as the I-40 Corridor Mayors Group. And there was a lot of bringing things to the table, working things out, and being part of the broader conversation. So I would like to say thank you for that. I'm going to give you the last word today. Anything you would like to leave our viewers with regards to the concept of statesmanship and what they should be looking for as they move forward in, helping to elect more people to office.
I would encourage people today to engage with politics. My concern is that a lot of people are turning away because it's messy, and it is messy, but it's always been messy. So that's not new, and we need people who really care about their communities to get involved and really consider stepping into a political role. It's very rewarding. It's not easy, but it is rewarding. And you are able to help accomplish things that wouldn't happen without your role in it. So I think that's the main thing. As to what you look for, I would just encourage people to look for individuals that really, I would look for those that look beyond one single issues and offer more of their perspective and their positions on things that matter to you as an individual. Because I think one other thing, I think that a lot of times, and I base this on some research that's being done in the state, that a lot of the dialogue in the churning that goes on really isn't about the issues that we in Arizona care most about. So look for those that are talking about things you care about.
I think that's very important. What it is that matters to you. And this is why we're talking to mayors, because mayors handle what is close to our heart and what matters to us directly.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Mayor Miles. I appreciate you being on this podcast. And I encourage our viewers to go back and look at the other podcasts that we've had around this important topic. And please stay tuned, because we do have guests coming up in August when we will continue this conversation about statesmanship and the need for statesmen.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.